So I know I said I was going to keep this under 15 minutes, and obviously we're over 15 minutes, but here we go. Um, Getting back to what we were talking about just a second ago with kind of the dealing with the definition of or the defining of the patriarchal. Um, Now, here is one read of marginality. So, in this regard, we're dealing specifically with a female artist who is here being interviewed. Her name is Susan Hiller, which obviously we've been talking about for the majority of the last video. Um, but here, marginality is defined as woman against man, or where man becomes the symbol of the patriarchal. But if you deal with positionality in another sense, say from the black perspective or the person of color perspective, which speaks more broadly about racial differences, the patriarchal is the the Western normative, i.e., the white, the Caucasian. And so Hiller, being a Caucasian artist, an artist of European descent, is part of that mode of the patriarchal. Even though she would probably argue against that, saying that no, it's because she is also a woman, she finds herself in the margins, but the reality is there are a variety of different marginalities that are defined by the patriarchal structure that they are butted up against. So, in other words, to give yet another example, I will speak from personal experience. I am outwardly a Western, a white man from the United States, which by all accounts means that I am part of the patriarchal system as it is defined. However, because of this one difference in the way that I am versus the way that this heteronormative stance or this patriarchal stance, I also occupy a certain level of marginality. So even though I might outwardly appear to be the very thing that people define as the patriarchal, I have often been referred. I mean, when I lived in black communities, I definitely had teenagers think that I was a police officer. I mean, I've been in places in Portland where people think I'm a cop, which means that I then inhabit the idea of like the quote unquote man, the man. Um, I'm getting slightly off topic, but I'm talking about the way that marginal groups are marginal against one thing. And Gayatri Spivak deals with this in her essay when she talks about the other versus the subject. And so you have the whole of bourgeois society with regard to Gayatri Spivak's article. Western society is defining what is the other. And for them, the other is non-Western peoples. So non-Western peoples are the marginal groups. They occupy the marginality. And so I think this quote speaks really beautifully to kind of round out our conversation on the positional or positionality, because from the first instance with Gayatri Spivak's article, we're talking about someone's ability to speak. And here Hiller is saying that she does not have the ability to speak unless she speaks in the way a man speaks. Not necessarily like with a deep voice and pretending to be a man, but with regard to how she talks about her world. Now, the reason why I'm spending so much time talking about this is because, a question has come up of, where are we today? And I'm going to get there more specifically in just a moment, but uh, understanding fully that an other, quote unquote, is always other to something specific. Non-Western people, well, their otherness is defined by NON dash. That is another way of saying other. They are to the West. They are other. They are non-Western. To the discourse surrounding feminism, the male is actually the other, because we are not part of, we are non-feminist because we are not female, and so marginal groups are always, I keep saying the same thing, marginal groups are defined by who they are speaking against. So that's marginality. Now Hiller talks about the idea of enunciation, and she's talking about her work specifically. And for her, the idea of enunciation is articulating the suppressed, the overlooked, the previously unsaid, unsayable side of our collective social production. And so here she is talking about how her works give agency or give voice to what exists in the margins. This is why her text is important for our conversation. It's why her text was important enough to be part of this Hillary Robinson's book. Hiller is she's giving the platform for these communities to speak. Now, that's slightly problematic because if we look at the article by Gayatri Spivak, she says that even if the subaltern is given the agency to speak, that agency to speak comes from within the system that says that they cannot speak. And that's why she ends up saying that no, the subaltern cannot speak, because the subaltern does not have the authority to speak at the same time, in the same way, or rather in a different way, but at the same time with the same authority as the group that defines them as subaltern. So, in a way, I'm putting these two terms up to point out their inherent contradiction. If you exist in the margins, then you cannot speak for yourself with regard to what is in the center. You have to develop another discourse. In this case, it's feminism. But what Hiller is trying to say is that her work gives the ability of those who can't speak, those who exist in the margins, to be able to engage in the same critical discourse. And I'm saying that it can't be true. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Either you have the ability to speak and you are part of that patriarchal system, or you do not have the ability to speak. You are outside of the patriarchal system and you are marginalized. But that marginality is defined by the system which you are standing outside of. So basically, everyone's positionality is personal. Everyone's everyone's body is signified by the political grouping that they exist in. We live in the Western world. We live in the United States. We work in the United States, and so our political body is of the United States. And so individually, all of our individual bodies exist as reflections of the way that community views us. So when, to use myself as an example once again, when people walk down the street and they look at me, they don't see the fact that that I am actually a marginalized person because I'm a queer person. Instead, they view me as, a white man. When I pronounce the fact that I am queer, whether through action or just the words that I just said, then the way that they interact with me changes, and therefore my interaction with the community changes. I don't have the same conversations that I would have had if I was actually, that heterosexual white male that exists within the patriarchal structures of all of these feminist discourses. Kind of a lot to grapple with, but we'll get there. We're talking. All right, so this is a work by Mary Kelly, and this is one of the works that's referenced in the reading today about Charcot. The Joanne Isaac, Mapping the Imaginary. And so with this work, what Mary Kelly is saying, she's identifying something that represents her otherness. So, as a woman born in the baby boom generation, the idea of wearing a leather jacket presents her as counterculture. It presents her as outside of the mainstream. It presents her as I'm not even going to engage with the various meanings of the text underneath of this word, which is menace or menise. Uh, but basically, what Kelly is doing with this project, by cataloging the ways that she is different than, she is basically giving structure to the thing that defines her as outside of it. By saying that she is this dress and that she is this leather jacket and that she is outside of the mainstream, she's in a roundabout way saying that the mainstream is not this leather jacket. The mainstream is not the menace. The mainstream exists in another way. And so, in the same way that naming something gives authority to the person that names it, pronouncing it gives authority to the person who has been named. And so, where a woman is subjugated by the male authority in almost every culture in the United States, if they want to reclaim a certain level of their political agency, they need to pronounce who they are in relationship to that group. And so here, what Kelly is saying is, I am not occupying the normative female standard as put forth by the patriarchal system. I am occupying another kind of it being, that wearing a leather jacket. Now, here we have Barbara Kruger, who deals with graphic design as a way of having a conversation about gender norms. By using the standard that really clearly defines how we interact with mainstream society. I mean, the idea of the advertising man basically gave a definition for what Susie Homemaker was, for what Aunt Jemima was, for what the Letterman football player is. All of these people are defined in our collective culture through the products of advertising. There are other systems that we can talk about, but the way that images are made in the advertising world and the way that images are convey a certain level of cultural meaning is why Kruger turned to advertising to kind of argue about the position of female bodies in the 1980s in the United States. And so here, your body is a battleground. She is saying that your identity as a female is in contention, specifically because it is a female body. So why nothing from the last 20 years? I am not showing you any work from the last 20 years because the positional today exists in the self. Um, this is kind of a hard thing to grapple with, but it's what I've been talking about for the last 15 minutes, and here I am coming up on another 15. Um, Simply put, we are all political bodies, and if you look at the Joanne Isaac, her conversation about Lacan is instrumental to what I'm talking about. We understand who we are partially because we understand who we are inside, but also because we understand the way that people relate to us. And so our bodies are always political, and we are always political. Whether we want to be activists with that political disposition or whether we want to just be passive and make work that exists in other terrains is up to you. But the positional, for the way I want to convey it to you, is basically a methodology, and therefore it's a tool. It's a tool that you can use when making work, when talking about work, and when thinking about yourself as an artist. How are people viewing the work that is coming from your position on the planet? And with that, I leave you a link to Kara Walker. She's awesome, and she summarizes it really beautifully. So take a look. See you in the discussions.